The wind cut across the plains like a knife, carrying with it the sharp tang of winter and the distant, mournful cries of coyotes. The sky, a bruised canvas of grays and deep purples, pressed down on the earth as though it, too, carried the weight of some ancient sorrow. Amid the barren expanse, a lone figure moved with a quiet urgency, her moccasins sinking slightly into the frost-hardened ground with each cautious step. She paused, ears pricked, eyes scanning the horizon, as the crunch of her own movements seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. Her heart thumped with a nervous rhythm, a drumbeat of awareness and dread, because she knew, without needing to see them yet, that the predators of the plains had marked her. The wolves were near. She had been traveling alone for days, tracing the contours of the land that was at once familiar and treacherous. The snow had begun to fall in sporadic flakes, not enough to cover her tracks but enough to chill her fingers and the tip of her nose. Her name, spoken only in whispers around the fire by her people, had been carried by the wind, strong, determined, cautious. Now, stripped of the safety of her village, she felt exposed in a way that was both foreign and frightening. She had known the dangers of the plains, the way the earth could shift beneath your feet, the way the animals watched, and the way death could arrive silently, without warning. Yet nothing had prepared her for the hunger-filled, luminous eyes she glimpsed through the fog of the forest's edge. They came first as shadows, stretching, fluid, graceful and deadly, moving with the collective precision of a pack that had long learned the patterns of the prey they hunted. The woman froze, every muscle taut, breath caught in her chest. Her bow, carved from the sapling she had found along a riverbank weeks before, felt suddenly heavy in her hands, its string coarse against her fingers. She could hear the low growls that rose from the underbrush, a sound that pricked the hair along her neck. Wolves. Not a single one, but a pack, their numbers hidden by the folds of the rising mist, each one radiating an instinctual menace. She had faced danger before, but never like this, never so raw, so immediate. The survival instinct flared within her, a fierce, ancient fire, yet there was a deep, gnawing fear she could not entirely suppress. Her mind raced. The forest thinned here, giving way to a small clearing where the snow had yet to settle fully. If she ran, the wolves would catch her. If she stayed, they would circle, testing, hunting, their patience as dangerous as their teeth. She crouched, trying to become a part of the shadows, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders, the hide of a small deer she had hunted weeks prior. The wolves were patient, and she knew their patience was part of the terror. Her pulse drummed in her ears, each beat marking the passage of time in a space that had suddenly grown impossibly small. She whispered a prayer under her breath, a plea to the spirits of the land, to her ancestors, to any force that would listen. Then she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the wilderness, a human sound carried over the crackling wind. It was the soft beat of hooves against the earth, slow, deliberate, measured. Her heart jumped. She strained her eyes, trying to see through the haze of snow and shadow, and there he was, a lone cowboy, mounted on a dark, almost black horse that moved with a kind of fluid certainty. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a coat that flapped like a banner in the gusting wind. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face that bore the weathered lines of a life spent in the sun and wind, yet his eyes were sharp, alert, unyielding. In that instant, she saw not only a man but a force of calm, a center of gravity that seemed to assert itself against the chaos of the world around him. The wolves hesitated, ears swiveling, their yellow eyes reflecting both fear and curiosity. They had never encountered a man like this before, a man whose presence seemed to command the very air. The cowboy dismounted with a grace that spoke of experience, his boots landing softly despite the snow, and reached for the rifle slung across his back. There was no panic in his movements, no wasted motion, only precise, calculated actions born of years spent facing danger and learning its rhythms. The woman, crouched behind a gnarled tree, dared to breathe, feeling a surge of hope she had not felt in days. The pack surged forward, driven by hunger and instinct, but the cowboy was ready. He raised the rifle, took a careful aim, and fired. The sharp crack of the shot split the air, and one of the wolves yelped, retreating into the shadows. The others hesitated, and that hesitation was all he needed. Another shot rang out, and the second wolf faltered. He did not move hastily. Each action was deliberate, controlled, almost ritualistic in its execution. He was not a man of many words, but of decisive action, and in that moment, his very presence carved a space of safety amidst the danger. The woman remained still, watching, her chest heaving, her hands gripping the bow so tightly that the wood creaked. She had been saved, yet she could not yet relax. Survival was never absolute, not on these plains, not in the cold grasp of winter. When the final wolf retreated, slinking back into the forest as though it had encountered an invisible barrier it could not cross, the cowboy lowered his rifle, his gaze sweeping the clearing, ensuring the threat had passed. Then, slowly, he turned toward her. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that instant, a silent understanding passed between them. Words were unnecessary, the unspoken bond of survival was enough. She saw in him a reflection of her own determination, her own resilience, tempered by an unshakable calm. He did not approach quickly, did not rush her, but he made his presence known with a steady, deliberate step, the soft crunch of snow beneath his boots a rhythm that spoke of assurance. She rose from behind the tree, still cautious, still aware of the fragility of safety, yet drawn forward by a strange, undeniable magnetism. "You're my man now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying across the clearing with a clarity that seemed to hang in the cold air. The words were not boastful, nor were they a declaration of possession in the way some might understand them. They were a recognition, a marking of fate, a naming of a moment in which their lives had intersected with consequence. She did not yet know him, did not yet trust him fully, but she acknowledged the bond formed in the crucible of danger, the unspoken promise of protection, and perhaps even the hint of companionship that might grow from necessity and circumstance. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, his face an unreadable mask, yet there was something in his eyes, a spark, a flicker of understanding, that confirmed he grasped the weight of her declaration. He did not speak, for speech seemed unnecessary, but he offered a hand, gloved, roughened by labor and weather, and it hovered in the space between them like a bridge over the void of uncertainty. She hesitated only briefly before placing her own hand atop his, the contact electric in its simplicity, a wordless agreement forged in the raw, elemental force of survival. The forest, which had seemed so alive with menace moments before, now felt strangely quiet, as though it, too, had recognized the shift. The wind carried away the last echoes of the wolves' cries, leaving only the whisper of snowflakes against the trees and the steady, comforting sound of the horses' hooves in the distance. They stood together in the clearing, two figures bound by circumstance, strangers yet linked by an event that would define them both. She felt a strange mixture of relief, gratitude, and something she could not yet name, perhaps admiration, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the faint stirrings of hope. He adjusted the brim of his hat and gestured toward the forest's edge. She followed, moving with cautious steps, aware that the plains were unforgiving and that their journey together had only just begun. There was a rhythm to the way he walked, a cadence that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the land itself, and she found herself matching it without realizing, each step a quiet testament to trust earned and danger survived. The snow continued to fall, soft and persistent, blanketing the world in white, and for the first time in days, she felt that the cold was not entirely hostile. It could not touch the warmth that had begun to grow between them, fragile though it might be, like the first green shoots that push through frozen soil. In that moment, she knew that her life had shifted irrevocably. The plains were still vast, still full of peril, but she was no longer entirely alone. There was a man, a cowboy whose presence was both reassuring and enigmatic, who had entered her world with quiet authority and decisive action. And she, in turn, had acknowledged the bond that now existed between them, fragile and unspoken, but undeniable. The wolves were gone, but the memory of their eyes would linger, a reminder of the danger that always waited at the edges of life. Yet for now, there was only the clearing, the snow, and the man who had, in one decisive act, altered the course of her journey. She looked at him again, searching his eyes for any hint of what lay ahead. He met her gaze steadily, unflinching, and she felt a strange sense of reassurance, as though the land itself had chosen this moment, chosen him, chosen them to stand together against whatever might come next. She did not yet know his story, did not yet understand the full measure of the man before her, but she trusted, instinctively, that he would face the dangers as he had today, with calm, with courage, with an unshakable sense of purpose. And in the quiet aftermath of fear and violence, she found herself allowing the faintest smile to touch her lips, a small acknowledgement of relief, of gratitude, of the strange, new thread of connection that had been woven between them in the cold, wild expanse of the plains.